everybody, in this quick video I just want to talk a little bit more about yarn selection. There's a lot of information on yarn labels and I just want to take a minute to kind of walk through that with you and explain so when you go to the yarn shop that you'll know what you're looking at and what you're looking for. So I picked this particular skein just because number one, I love Lamb's Pride yarn from Brown Sheep, but also because it's just really easy to see kind of the texture and the label. So your yarn label will tell you obviously the name of the type of yarn. This is called Lamb's Pride, and right underneath it says worsted, which is a weight of yarn. Yarn comes in all different kinds of weights, anywhere from fingering weight, which is a very, very fine gauge yarn, all the way up to a bulky weight, which is a really, really thick yarn. So worsted weight is kind of right in the middle of those on the range of all the different yarns that are out there. So this label also tells you the kind of combination or the breakdown of what the fibers are made out of. So this particular yarn is 85% wool and 15% mohair. So if you look really closely, you can just kind of see it. This yarn has a nice little loft to it, and that's because of just the combination of that wool and mohair. So then if we keep turning our yarn label around, you're always going to see a weight. So this is 4 ounces or 113 grams. So when you're looking at a pattern, that's really important information because a pattern might not call for a specific yarn. It might just say 100 grams of worsted weight yarn, so that you can have that information to choose something that you like that works with the pattern. Again, underneath approximately it tells you your yardage. So this is 190 yards per skein. And it gives you a gauge as well. So what that means is this is about 4.5 stitches per inch. So if I were to knit what's called a swatch, let's just say I knit a small swatch, I cast on 10 stitches and I worked in stockinette stitch for 10 rows or so, I should measure 4.5 stitches per inch if I'm using a needle size 8. Again, if you're doing a project like our beginner scarf, that's not really that important. But if you are following a pattern, it will always give you a gauge, and it's important to work to that gauge because that helps you determine what your finished garment will measure. So if you wanted to measure like the pattern, then your gauge needs to be correct. If you're knitting tighter, you might get more stitches per inch, and then your finished project will look very different. Or if you're a loose knitter, and let's say you work 3 stitches to the inch, obviously that would affect the final dimensions of your project. So gauge is really important, and we'll be talking a little bit more about that in some of the other courses where it's going to be a little more important. So then it gives you what's called the dye lot. That color you see, or the M191, is the color, which is called kiwi. And then underneath is another number, 086, and that is the dye lot. So when they made this particular skein of yarn, they made a whole batch of it with the same dye color. And a lot of hand dyed yarns especially might not have dye lots because every skein is really different. But in a kind of bigger batch yarn like this one, different dye lots may look very different. So like let's say this exact same color, kiwi, in a different dye lot, while holding the skeins next to each other, you might not notice the difference. But if you were knitting with it, when you make that transition to a different skein of yarn, if it were a different dye lot, it might be very obvious. So that's also important information. So let's say for your scarf, you were using this same yarn, you went to your yarn shop, you would want to make sure you get skeins all with that same dye lot number. Okay, let's move on to the next part of our label. So then we have, let's see, yeah, just tells you who the company is. A lot of labels will also have this, most labels will in fact, washing instructions. So that's really important because obviously certain wools, certain yarns should not go in the machine washer or dryer. Some can, some are hand wash only. So these are universal yarn symbols. So this will tell you that this is hand wash only. So it's just really important information because it depends. If you are knitting a project that you want to be able to toss in the washer, then make sure you choose something that the yarn will let you do that. If I were to put this, if I were to knit a scarf with this yarn and put it in the washing machine in warm water, it would come out felted. It would change the everything about the yarn. It would shrink it down. It would make it like a thick fabric because it would have felted itself. So important information. So if you want something that is machine washable, make sure that you look for that when you are choosing your yarn. Again, there are lots and lots of so many different types of yarn out there, and the label gives you a lot of really great and useful information. So make sure you check your label. And for this project, again, you're going to need about 400 yards of yarn. And you want to make sure that if it's more than one skein, that you look at your dye lots. And yeah, so hopefully that helped a little bit explain about what all of the information on the label means. For our next video, we are going to get into casting on. See you there.